Hello and welcome to episode 20 of This Much is
20.
True Crime. Professor David Wilson, who thought we would actually survive this far, eh?
Well, it's great that we're at episode 20. And please forgive me, Martin, my voice sounds a bit hoarse. As you know, I've been doing the audio book of my next book called A History of Britain in 20 Murders. So I've been speaking consecutively for 4 days, which is why I sound a bit hoarse.
And there's a tour that goes with that as well, and people can buy tour. Do they get tickets if they want to see you on tour talking about the book?
Yeah, they do. www.crimesofbritain.co.uk. But the Scottish dates, I think, are really selling out fast. So it's mostly the south of England now if you want to come and hear or listen to me.
And of course, we are now officially a top 10 true crime podcast. Admittedly, it was number 10 we got to, and then we sort of slipped down one or two things. But that's great. And I think we're just about the only independents, hey folks out there. We're the only ones who are doing this ourselves. We don't have a big team behind us. We don't have a big publishing group supporting us. We are a little indie in amongst all the big boys. And I think that's really great, the fact that we got to the top 10.
I do as well, but at the end of the day, I mean, I've now had to put earphones on. You've sent me a microphone. We're becoming much more professionalized doing this, and I wonder to what extent we can continue to be professional in that way, and at what point, Martin Frizell, are we going to accept that we might be doing commercials for people so as to make a bit of money to pay for the microphones that you keep sending me?
I mean, I will just say in terms of, you're wearing headphones, I've got one sort of earpiece in. For people who are not aware, we are on YouTube. So if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple, if you want to see our ugly mugs, you can go onto YouTube and see
Speak for
this. And
yourself.
it's the same audio quality. You just see, my front room. Where's that room you're in? Is that like a box room
This
of
is
some
my
kind?
study,
All
and
right.
it's been painted recently as well. So this is my study.
Showing it off. Okay. Now, today, now this is an interesting one. We're talking British mums on the run, the matriarchs who are in charge of crime families. And when we suggested this, I thought, well, maybe it's one or two. My goodness me, these we've got quite prolific women we're talking about.
I know for me, this is a great story that late in the day, a lot of people seem to be catching up on. And there was a big article in the Daily Mail about women at the head of organized crime groups. And there seemed to be surprise and shock at women might be actually leading these crime groups. Because, of course, so often we've conceived of the woman's role within an organized crime group as being the victim. She's the spotter, the transporter. She's somehow put upon, and that has failed to acknowledge this broader role that women can play in organized crime groups when they're fully involved in criminal values and running the damn thing.
Well, to be honest, David, I mean, down through history, there's not been a lot of women who have been held up as being the bad guys. I'm thinking of Bonnie and Clyde. I'm thinking of Myra Hindley. If you want to go into the movies, Thelma and Louise. Although that was probably a crime of passion of some kind that she committed, and they did sort of course, oh, spoiler, went over the cliff in their car, didn't they? But there's not been that many in terms of headlines of women seem to be doing bad things. We always seem to say, if women ruled the world, there would be no wars, apart from maybe Mrs. Thatcher taking us into the Falklands War. But they seem to be the gentler sex, and they wouldn't for a second be the kind of, devious characters that are running, big operations.
Well, and to a certain extent, that's true. And often, for example, I will say that, 9 out of 10 perpetrators of murder are men. Women do commit murder, but by and large, murder is a male phenomenon. When we think about the sexual abuse of children, the vast majority of abusers are male, although you get women who sexually abuse. There's always some kind of shock and surprise when the perpetrator is revealed to be a woman. However, sometimes what we've done in the past is essentialize what it takes to commit crime, and you essentialize those skills personal qualities, and underlying personality, and believe that somehow those are masculine values, but equally they can apply to women. And what we really are catching up on now in terms of this story, mums on the run who are organizing crime groups, is the fact that women can play and often do play roles which are far more complicated and embedded in these organized crime groups than we have historically given them credit for. And I would say this, even if we're not thinking about crime, we all know from matriarchs in our own families how powerful matriarchs are, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, our mothers, and how they were steely and determined and could often make decisions that our fathers or grandfathers or great-grandfathers might not have made.
Yeah, they didn't quite go as far as smuggling cocaine or cannabis, but I take your point. Let me just give the listener, the viewer, one or two examples. There seems to be a predilection for the Far East and Indonesia in particular, with mums on the run. For instance, British mother of three and her partner, Lisa Stocker, 39 years old, from Hastings. She's just avoided the death penalty by firing squad in
Yep.
Bali. And she was convicted of smuggling cocaine into Bali in sachets of Angel Delight. Now, what a novel way of thinking of doing about it. Maybe do the Indonesians know what Angel Delight is, though? Maybe that's why they found it suspicious. But she was caught doing that, and they thought that she was going to have to face the firing squad. With leniency, they said, no, you're going to go to jail. They thought it might be 45 years. It's only 12 months she's got. So, I mean, she's a very lucky woman. Unlike another woman, there's a granny who's in jail again in Bali. She's actually on death row, 69-year-old Lindsay Sanford, mum of two. And she's been on death row for 12 years for smuggling cocaine. And she's been on there so long, she's actually pleading with the authorities, please just shoot me and get it over and done with.
Oh gosh, that really is. Well, I'm against the death penalty, and I don't know what involvement the Foreign Office have in her case. But if she has asked for repatriation, I mean, perhaps that is available to her. I think that one of the things that we are just in this litany of British mums who have been drug smugglers or are at the top, the hierarchy of the organized crime group. You must remember, sometimes women are recruited to transport the drugs. They act as drug mules. But other women have actually been in charge of the group. Have you followed the case, for example, of Deborah Mason from North London, who's 65, a drug baron, a grandmother, a mother of 7 children, and the head of an organized crime group worth £80 million, and she was having her family traffic cocaine. She even had her 2 grandchildren sit on potties in the back of a van, and in the potties, never mind Angel Delight, the potties were carrying cocaine.
And also, I understand the details that the police gave out was that they arrested her sitting on the toilet in her nightie. Now, that's quite comical, but I do think there's a bit of sexism in that. They wouldn't probably have given out those kind of details if it was a man they were arresting, is it? I mean, I don't know why I'm sticking up for the gangster granny. I mean, she's peddling, drugs and bringing misery. But the police probably wouldn't go into that much detail if it was a man they'd arrested.
Although, I just watched a Channel 4 documentary about the police infiltrating a gang, and there were reconstructions of the gang members who had been infiltrated, and those reconstructions had every single male gang member in their underwear, and I didn't understand why that was happening either. But I loved Deborah Mason, who was so reveling in her character as the matriarch in charge of an organized crime group. I mean, she wanted to be known as Gangster Debs, and sometimes what you're saying, both in terms of the 2 cases in Bali and in relation to Deborah Mason, is that their gender is an asset to them. When she was arrested, Deborah Mason, that is, when she was arrested, she was basically saying, who, me? You can't really be meaning me, because obviously if you're a woman, because of where we started in this discussion, organized crime groups are seen as macho and masculine. Therefore, gender is an attribute. If you're actually the leader of the organized crime group, you can say, you can't think I'd be doing this because look at me. I'm a little old lady. I'm a mother. So sometimes gender can be helpful for them if they want to lead this kind of drug trafficking business.
And that kind of, caring, empathetic, compassionate mum kind of character that some of them are painted out to be applies to. It's the most recent one. Part of the reason why we're talking today, just a few days ago, is the case of Farzana Kauser from Bradford, jailed for 13 years and 4 months. And she used her own children. This is what gets me. She used her own children to smuggle millions of pounds of cocaine through Birmingham Airport. She would send them to Amsterdam, and they would happen to, well, not happen, they would deliberately tie in with the flight coming from Cancun in Mexico, where there were no passengers, but just bags, obviously an insider who got the bags on the plane, which
Yeah.
is really dangerous. They would go to the carousel from Cancun. They're there in time for the Cancun flight carousel. They take the bags off and then bring them to Birmingham. But this is her own children she's doing this with.
Well, I think it was her four sons, her daughter, and some daughter-in-laws. And look at how, when it was common knowledge that she had been arrested. Look at what people who knew Farzana Kausa said about her. They described her as thoughtful, a thoughtful, loving mum who seemed normal. And that was probably true. There's how gender plays into allowing her to behave in public one way and in private in a completely different way. I was also intrigued, Martin, though, by the description of the police about her in terms of the organization that went into the fact that she smuggled over 14 million pounds worth of cocaine into the country. The police said that she led the organized crime group with dedication and determination, with sophistication. And here are all those things, again, that I would go back to about not essentializing gender. Women can be dedicated and determined and have an organizational sophistication. And the fact that she was using her children made this appear to me almost as if this was the family business. And therefore, people got socialized into committing crime in a way that they might have found that more difficult if the family business was something completely different.
And that quote you read out was from the National Crime Agency, who sort of released all their details of it and what they thought about it. And they went on to say, though, after the point they were making about her being determined and dedicated gangster, basically, is that, and she ruined the lives of her children.
Oh, and that's also absolutely true. There's a sense in which I suppose we are both correcting, because there's a tendency when we think about these stories to make them slightly humorous, to think of them as slightly comic, whereas in fact this is a real issue. The organized crime groups, how a lot of women are in very senior positions in organized crime groups, and all organized crime groups destroy lives. All organized crime groups, because of course they're usually dealing in drugs, are putting substances on the streets of this country which kill, which cause harm. And so I know there is a natural tendency to think, my gosh, Gangster Debs is actually kind of a comic figure. But we've also got to remember, and the same with Farzana Kausa, that they do cause harm. I was just as interested in, because we've called this episode Mums on the Run, haven't we? And one of the other women that's been in the news is Lynn Layson from Carmarthenshire, who was seen again as a respectable grandmother and farmer. And yet she was running a multi-million-pound drug enterprise involving her partner and her partner's son. And I was equally intrigued by the fact that she went on the run successfully for 14 months. Being on the run, if you're an offender, is not an easy thing to do, because you've got to be able to support yourself yourself for that length of time, and you've also got to be able to psychologically robust enough to be able to stay beneath the radar. And I was intrigued by Lynn Layson, who hasn't got the same publicity, I think, as the other cases that we've been mentioning.
You'll know more than I do. I mean, do these women who are running these crime families, gangs, do they deal in violence? I mean, you would certainly just from watching movies and watching dramas, the kingpin of the crime family is very often, the toughest, sadistic, awful kind of character. Are the women like that as well?
Well, the women will be tough. I mean, I can't say that I've ever interviewed a female who is at the head of an organized crime group. I can't say that I have. But let's be honest, they probably aren't using the violence themselves. They're getting somebody else to use the violence on their behalf. And that will be why so often they're using sons or sons-in-law to be able to deliver that aspect of running the organized crime group. And sometimes it's not the violence itself, Martin. Sometimes it is about the threat of violence, the willingness to scare some of the people lower down the organized crime network into behaving as the head of the group wants them to behave. Just the threat of violence is often enough to make this system work.
Because I just wondered whether or not showing, just how violent you can be is a sign of commanding respect. And whether or not women who are doing that, do they have to find that respect? And are you saying they get their respect in a different way?
I think they'll be getting their respect in different ways. I certainly don't think, and there has been no reporting, as far as I can see, of women who've behaved violently whilst acting in that role. The reporting seems to suggest that they are using others to enact the violence that they want to see perpetrated upon people lower down the organized crime group, or indeed rivals to the organized crime group. So I think it would be a much more complicated picture. But what is emerging from all the publicity about the cases that we've been mentioning is that women have really genuinely been an unacknowledged component of transnational organized crime groups. And so often the only role that's been ascribed to women in those organized transnational crime groups it has been one of being a victim, or very low down the group as being a mule or as a transporter. Whereas in fact, these women show us that they can run these groups as much as men could run these groups, albeit we've tended to think of those groups as being masculine and macho. You very cleverly mentioned, because I love movies, and so you're always bringing a cinema story into it. Did you watch Emilia Perez, the 2024 movie?
No, no, I'm aware of it, but I didn't see it.
Emilia Perez, a Spanish film set in Mexico, very controversial in all kinds of ways, but starring Selena Gomez and Carla Sofia Gascon, who plays the boss of a drug cartel who transitions from male to female, and of course that was the first time I think lots of people started to connect the idea that don't essentialize the skills and qualities or personalities that it would come to take, that would be needed to come to lead such a group. Those qualities can be male or female.
I mean, there are. I mean, we could spend all night probably talking about great dramas and TV series. I mean, Ozark was another one, which
Oh, I
sadly,
liked Ozark.
but remember though, the wife then took over because he kind of blew it, didn't he, a bit? So the wife then started to be the kind of the villain of the piece, really running and making money for her family. I'll also just drop in here a second season coming of our favorite This City Is Ours, based on
Oh,
the
when's
Liverpool
that coming
Phelan
back?
family, and of course, it will then take up probably where it left off, which I presume will be the matriarch of the Phelan family running the business now.
When is that coming back?
Well, I think they're filming it very soon, so it's 2026 probably. You're going to have to wait until next year to see that. But that was brilliant, and I can't wait for that one. But I think there will definitely be, the strong women will be running that. In fact, the whole family there have strong women in it, so it'll be interesting to see how they turn it around. Now, I just want to mention that gangster granny Deborah Mason, who said she was in charge of 10 of her family who did it. They got a jail term in total of more than 100 years. When these women go to jail, to women's jails, how are they treated? How are female crime bosses treated in jail? Is it like a mirror of how male crime bosses are in jail?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we've discussed consistently on the pod has been how I say, they import their life from the community into the prison. And therefore, all the skills, all the personal qualities, the underlying personality of gangster Debs, all of that is going to be imported into jail. Plus, remember, um, she will have access to money, or people who will have access to money that she can use while she's inside. And so her life she'll be at the top of the hierarchy. She'll be at the top of the tree. She will be able to buy herself protection. She'll be, if she needs it, and she will be able to live a pretty comfortable life whilst she's inside.
I was kind of getting the impression that I just think naturally that it would be a cushier, comfier life, more gentler environment than the kind of, violent scenes that we know and sort of out of control episodes we've spoken about in men's jails. I haven't really seen that, women are as, out there in terms of just really bloody minded and sadistic in jail.
Well, there are dramas, of course, that deal with those things. Think about Bad Girls. Think about Within These Walls. So there are dramas that will often play upon
Yeah, but it
the
doesn't seem to be as bad as the stories we've discussed that happen in men's jails.
I think that's true because I accept that as true in the round. I mean, there will often be incidents that have to be very carefully managed in women's jails, and I have been into a few relatively recently. But what's different, Martin, is the scale. Men's jails, there are lots of men in prison, and there are comparatively fewer women in prison. And therefore, that allows the prison itself to have greater control over what's happening inside. And some of those extreme incidents that we've spoken about in the past, some of those extreme incidents don't really happen. And so, for example, I've not really come across a riot in a female prison. I've not really come across, a rooftop protest in a female prison. They do tend to run, because of the numbers are so much lower, in a very much more controlled way.
What we've been talking about so far are matriarchs who've been running crime families that have been dealing in drugs, probably extortion, organized crime. When it comes down to serial killers, like the uber awfulness of crimes, uh, they don't seem to be as prolific as men in terms of, being the perpetrators. Women, Lucy Letby is the most recent probably. But apart from her, who's gone alone as a bona fide serial killer being a woman?
Yeah, well, as you say, Lucy Letby, according to the law, I know it's a controversial case, is a bona fide serial killer
Well,
by
she's
the
guilty.
definition.
She's been found guilty and she's guilty.
Yeah, and she killed three or more people in the period of greater than 30 days. The standard definition of what we mean by a serial killer, she's a serial killer. Prior to Lucy Letby, the most famous, the next most immediate person I can think of is not a serial killer, she's a spree killer. That would be Joanne Dennehy, who murdered three men in Peterborough. The case becomes known as the Peterborough Ditch Murders. And of course, she was murdering within a folie à deux. She tended to be the dominant one in the folie à deux
So
with a man,
what's a fully a duh?
a folie à deux, a madness shared by two. and she simply has a worldview that gets accepted by the subservient person who wants to subscribe to that particular worldview. It's a distorted worldview. It's an irrational worldview, but they are so the dominant within that folie à
So
deux,
what they just say they're brainwashed, basically, aren't
more
they?
or less,
But
more or less.
by a Svengali
A
figure.
Svengali-like figure is going to convince them that they should behave in a way that they would never have behaved if they had never met that particular Svengali. So she was the dominant of a folia that with a man called Gary Stretch, if memory serves me correctly, and they're going to be convicted. She and he are going to be convicted of the murder of 3 men and attempted murder of 2 other men, and Gary Stretch is going to be convicted of being an accessory to those murders. But she's a spree murderer. Prior to her, we've obviously got the 2 infamous other British serial killers, who are Myra Hindley, Rose West, again, who murder within a folie à deux, although they are seen as being subservient rather than dominant within that folie à deux. But the less well-known ones, and probably a forerunner to Lucy Letby, would be Beverly Allett, the nurse who murders babies and infants in Grantham and Kesteven General Hospital. And she is now seen as having had Munchausen syndrome and a fictitious illness disorder, I think we now call it. And prior to Beverly Allett, if you go back in history, we've got a number of women who killed, like Mary Ann Cotton, who murders at least 21 people in the Victorian period. And there are a number of women who acted as so-called baby farmers, so that people, people would give up their newborn infant to be brought up by the baby farmer, whereas in fact it was just an excuse for that woman to take money and kill the child. And there are a number of those in our history.
And would these female killers or serial killers, would they get the same joy, satisfaction as a male serial killer gets from it?
Well, if
Is it a power thing? I mean, what is it?
It certainly is a power thing in my experience of researching these cases, and don't underestimate how sexually gratifying some of their behavior is that's documented. And I'm thinking about Mary Ann Cotton holding down one of her lovers as she knew he was dying because she had poisoned him, and she had somebody witness that event, and that very much seemed like she was performing. There's a lot of sadism, obviously, in what Rose West did. There is sadism in terms of what Myra Hindley did. In relation to Joanne Dennehy, remember, she's also very performative in terms of being very open about her sadomasochism. She makes sure she got photographed with a big dagger that she's going to point at her tongue. She has lots of piercings, tattoos. I think there's a lot in common with male serial killers that I've worked with in terms of their sexual gratification through the exercise of a distinct form of power.
It's fascinating, isn't it? We've gone quite far away from what we thought was just quite quaint old ladies on the run. And it's really gone quite dark, hasn't it? Apologies for anyone who's on holiday, maybe listening to this, in your headphones and your earphones on the beach. But look around you, and it's not just men we have to be worried about now. Women are just as capable of this too, aren't they? They could be
Well, and
living next door
Debs
to you.
used to, Deb's Gangster Debs used to go on holiday to Dubai, or Bahrain. So if you're in Dubai and Bahrain on holiday at the minute, Gangster Debs used to love going there. By the way, she was also leading this organized crime group whilst she was claiming £50,000 a year on benefits.
Oh, there's Debs for you, eh? Good old
Gangster
Debs doesn't
Debs.
let us down, eh? Good old Debs, doing everything wrong. Listen, we'll leave it there, David. Thank you so much. Marvelous insight. I learned a lot. Every day's a school day with you, isn't it? Thank you so much. Until the next time,
Take
bye,
care.
everyone.
Lovely talking to you again, Martin.